Good morning, everyone. My name is Phindile Mkhize, and today I'll be speaking to you about how it's not CSS and it is, in fact, you. Yes, I chose to name and shame everyone, and we're going to do it in one go. And I remember when I told my friends about the topic that I chose, they were like, wow, why did you have to make things personal? And yeah, I did make things personal, but since I things are already personal, I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we begin. So back home, I'm actually one of four kids. And yes, you didn't miss anything with not attending an AI talk. We got you covered. There was my older brother, and I have two sisters. And I like to say I was raised as a middle child. And I know you're doing the math and you can think two plus two, there's no middle there, but I'll explain. So, firstly, like I said, there's my older brother. He's the oldest, he'll inherit everything. He's the only one who's actually going to continue the family name. So, he's in a league of his own. He doesn't count in this whole equation. So, that's why it just leaves the three of us and how I then become the middle child. There's firstly my older sister. Of course, she was their first precious princess. My dad got to be a girl dad. My mom was a girl mom, and everything was nice. And then there's my little sister who pretty much runs everything. For some reason, hand gestures went from this to oh, everything now belongs to her for some reason. And then there's me, right there in the middle. And something to note, I'm so middle, even my name tells you this happened before. She just came in after. And one thing that you need to understand about middle children is that we understand our situation. We're not blind to the things that we have to go through. That, yeah, there's the first one, and then it somehow skips you and goes to the last person. And you're just sitting there like, wait, what happened? So we try our best to stand out, to be at the top and always make noise so that people can recognize who we are. And I think that's why I ended up in tech. I wanted to be a lot of things, and tech offered me that opportunity to be whatever I wanted. But in all those opportunities, what stood out to me was web development. And I love it. It's so amazing. You get to visualize your work. You get to see end users actually use the products that you're creating and see how it's enriching people's lives. There's things at the back, but we don't care about that right now. What happens is when the user is actually interacting with what you made. Over the years, I got to learn about JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and how all of these technologies come together to make the beautiful applications that we get to use in our day to day lives. But as I started learning all these things and time went on, I realized some things. First, there's HTML, usually the first page that you create when you're creating a web application. Everybody loves HTML and it matters, semantic tags. You can't use a div. You need to use the button, use the correct tag. It's all important. And of course, there's JavaScript, created in 10 days. Everybody knows there are no classes, no rules, but we're there, JavaScripting away, and we enjoy it. The only language in the front end that's considered a language, because everything else, imagine coming up to a person and say, yeah, I write code, HTML code. It doesn't make sense. And then I realized something. Hold up. Is CSS the middle child of the front end? Everybody loves HTML, it matters. It's the first thing that came about. And then there's JavaScript, of course. It can look nice, it can have a good structure, but does it actually work, And then when it comes to CSS, all everybody can think about is how am I going to center that div? You start getting help palpitations when you have to change a button from blue to green. But as I talked to people about CSS and the front end and why they were so opposed to it, I came to understand something. All this hate is just stemming from people not understanding the basics and not actually taking the time to learn CSS and to actually understand how it works and why we need to use it in certain ways. And I know some of you saw my talk title, and all you could see was, it's you. So you're here to pick a bone with me. I like to say I'm a snail. I have no bones. You cannot pick them. I'm just here to share. And then some of you were honest with yourselves. Okay. You said, yeah, I know the lines of code I'm writing each and every day. Some junior is going to look at it one day and cry. And then, you know what? I won't be around. So it's fine. But I know some of you are just here to understand a little bit more about CSS because you've had to deal with it. And you know what? It's time to actually sit down and hear something constructive about it. And that's also what I would like to focus on how all of these languages in the front end come together to make these beautiful websites and beautiful applications that we have to use. I'm lying. I'm here to tell you that CSS is awesome. Okay. We need to start putting respect on CSS's name and stop just skipping over it. And every time I ask somebody, why you don't like the front end? And they're like, yeah, I know it's CSS, bruh, you're lying. You don't know JavaScript, but CSS has to take the blame. And I know way back when we could have taken those excuses because a lot of devs back then were just backend devs, and then the browser started being popular and they were shoved into the front end. That was cool and all, but for some reason that attitude has kind of continued over the years, and nobody has actually been like, wait, let's take our time with this thing. So today, thank you for coming. We're going to sit and relax and learn a little bit about the basics of CSS because there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do, but if you don't understand the basics of where everything came from, then what is it all for? So, way back when, the original plan for the web didn't actually provide any tools to style it. It was kind of just text on a page and a bunch of links that you can probably go to. And the first people who started creating these web pages, like Mr. Mark over here, this is actually a page that he created way back in 1994. When he was asked about styling the web, all he can say was, sorry, you're screwed. There's nothing we can do about that. For now, just take the document as it is. But we know that we have to work with these things and we love aesthetics. So it has to look cute. So a lot of people took that as challenge accepted. Okay, we're gonna try our best to put some styles on these pages. So there were styles attempts like this. As you can see, some of y'all may see this as familiar, some inline styling, but of course, this was not going to be maintainable. It was going to be hard to implement. All those lines of code that you have to go through just to change a couple of things, there had to be something better. There had to be a way that we separate the content and structure of a page from the visual formatting and appearance of the page. And of course, there were a lot of attempts that were made and presented that this is how we're going to style things. But ultimately, a man named Harkin Lee, way back in October 94, presented this wonderful idea. And it was going to be so easy to implement, and it was just going to be streamlined, was going to streamline everything. And funny enough, he named it after his pet goat. Don't quote me on this. And he called it Cascading Style Sheets. It was going to be wonderful. It was a declarative language, which was simple. We're already declaring variables here and there, where you can just specify rule sets and you can be able to attach styles to whatever structure that you've created on your HTML. It could do wonderful things and make it all simple. Taking simple websites that's just words and pictures, making it more sleek, more inviting, where people can be able to interact with these things. And how did he do this? Or what's everything behind it? Well, it's simple. It's in the name, the cascade, you know. There's an order in all things. And in CSS, there's order too. I know sometimes it doesn't seem like it. There was a way on why styles on your page look the way they did. And it looks something like this. Take a deep breath. You don't have to read all of it right now. We'll go through it. So, firstly, there's origin and importance. You have to understand that the styles that are being presented to a user at the end have origins. And because of those origins, it depends if they're going to be implemented or not. Those origins, there's three of them. There's first the browser or the user agent. Yes, your browser has default styles and they will be implemented if you have not taken the time to put something there. There's also the local user, meaning that the actual person interacting with your application can choose sometimes what it's going to look like. And then lastly, there's the styles that you as a developer are going to implement and make sure that everything looks the way it does on the Figma. But then there's also the property of importance, where I would say now, stay away from it. Because as you can see, from least specific to most specific, that it throws all the order out of the window. That your browser styles were the least important, but now because your browser has put an important property on a certain style, that's what's going to be displayed to the user. And like with browser styles, let's say you've imported a font, and for some reason on a low end device and that network is not connecting, now you're looking at it and you're like, why is it Times New Roman when I implemented a different font? Your browser took control because there were no styles there. And sometimes you create a nice website and you're like, Mom, look at this, let me show you on your phone. And for some reason, the font is size Haibabo because now it's so big. It's because your mom has specifically gone into her settings and has made the font or the size so big. And then lastly, your styles, and we'll talk more about that later. Next is context. Context matters even in CSS. We have to know where these styles are coming from, yes, but are they coming from within the document or from outside? So there's something called the host styles or the whole DOM and then a shadow DOM. And what does it look like? It looks a little bit like this. So you're creating this document and it's all fine and dandy. And then you have this bright idea to introduce a component, because it makes life easier. You have a whole library of components. As soon as you implement that component onto your document, just know whatever styles or whatever you want to do, this whole component has its own DOM, has its own context of what styles it's supposed to have. So when you're trying to style that component that you had from Bootstrap and that title is not changing, is because of this. And again, there's hierarchy in things. So yeah, you can always change the styles of a component. It's in a shadow DOM. We can override it. But again, you introduce that important property and things go to hell. So just keep in mind that now you need to go to your manager and say, hey, that fix that I said is going to take 3 hours, it's going to take 2 days because now you need to build it from scratch because you're not understanding that the styles that they've put have important at the end of everything. And next is inline styling. Inline styling is simple, it will always win. Whether you have internal styles, you're exporting them from here, from there. If a tag has style on it, that is what is going to be displayed on your application. And next is CSS layers. Yes, CSS already has layers. We they put even more. This is something that was led by Miriam Susan. She added this because there were so many conflicts happening because of where styles were coming from. So now you can block styles and create your own layers and say, hey, if I have a theme, these are the styles that we're going to implement. There are default styles or default layers. There's default reset layers. There's utility layers. You can be able to group your styling according to what context is on the actual document. And I think we're all familiar with this one. And if you're not, it's probably why you were crying last night trying to fix your CSS. This one is CSS specificity. This one's very important because sometimes you open up the browser once you've implemented your style and you see things scratched out. You're like, Haibo, why is the blue scratched out and now it's green? It's because of the specificity of that styling. And it's pretty simple to understand. If you're styling an ID, that's the style that's going to be implemented. Next, it's a class. And lastly, it's a tag. We know as we work on big projects that things can get out of control and you can be importing styles from here and there and there's nobody who has time to go through lines and lines of code to see if this specific tag has been styled. So that's why sometimes things go out of hand. And I know we love our designers. They come up with these simple ideas that we can implement just overnight. Everything will be fine, where we can go from just styling a simple child class and now we have to style a container with the p tag that has a pseudo class of this because on the table this one cell has to be blue while everything is red. So once you understand how to use specificity with as an advantage to yourself, things will be way easier. So this is how it works. It's pretty much like a grading system. So inline styles, if there's an inline style, you just give that a 1. That means it gets 1,000 points. And then if that specific selector is an ID, then it gets a 1, which means it's 100. Again, if it's a class, then it's gonna be tens, and then an element is just ones. I'll give you examples so that you understand. So here we're styling a header ID with a nav var class, a list item, and an anchor tag. So we have one ID that gives it one on the hundreds, and then the class gives it one on the class, and then two elements that gives it two. So you can read it as 0112 or just 102. If there's anything else that's trying to style this anchor tag, it needs to beat this 102 score. Again, here we're styling two classes and three elements. That's going to be a 23. And then lastly, if it's inline styling, like I said, it will always win. Okay. And that's it. That's pretty much it. That's the funnel that you have to go through to understand that why do things look the way they do when I've implemented all these things? It's because they've gone through this process of seeing which styles are implemented and how specific they are in the hierarchy. We think we're done. No, we're not. Now we go to layouts because we love to put things everywhere on the page, but we need to do it again with order, with structure, so that when we go back, we're not crying. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, you can flex everything, it's fine. It's okay, just put it there. But there are more styling layouts that you can actually use, and they're quite productive. There's actually six of them. There's flow, flexbox, grid, positioning, table, and float. So what do we mean by flow? We mean the normal flow of the structure of your HTML. So if you're actually that good where you structure your HTML accordingly, you don't even have to go back to CSS and implement a different layout because you've taken the time to actually implement something that's good. And then there's floating, which was used way back in the day. I haven't seen a lot of floats in the projects that I've been. It was essentially used to float images to certain parts of the page and allow all the text to just flow around it. Not really meant for doing layouts, but it was very useful back then because everything was simple. But now, as you know, and with floats, things weren't as stable as people wanted it to be. In some browsers, it was quite finicky. There was weird behavior and bugs. So, yeah, be careful when using floats. And then tables. If you're not displaying tabular information, just don't use tables. Find a different layout because you're going to run into so much trouble. And then positioning. And I know, again, position absolute because you want that thing to go over there and that thing to go over there. No, that's not how it works. There's actually five positions that you can use when it comes to the position property. There's static, of course, just letting your element know, follow the same structure, the normal flow of the structure of how things are. And then there's relative position. It's not relative to the window, but it's relative to actually where the element is on the normal flow. So you're just using it to scooch it over, just to move it up a bit, just to make sure that things are where they're supposed to be. And then, of course, there's position absolute. Position absolute just it rips the element outside out of the DOM tree and just throws it wherever you want it to go. Don't use it all the time, please. And then there's fixed and static, which means just ignore the scroll. When somebody's scrolling and that nav bar needs to stick to the top or be fixed somewhere, that's the positioning property that you use. And then to our favorite besties that we use all the time, the display property that allows us to use Flexbox and the grid. Firstly, Flexbox pretty much allows you to have to access the flex direction of the elements on whichever container they're in, and then you can just style them in a one-dimensional way. It's either they go in a row or they go in a column. But then, as we know, when you flex things, you get so many other properties that you can be able to style. You can push things to the top, push them to the bottom. You can make things thin. You can stretch it out on your page to fill whatever container it is. It's amazing. We love it as front end developers. That's all we do these days. And yes, you can center a div. You can put the text at the bottom. You can do pretty much anything you want with Flexbox, and it's all amazing. But there's another display property that you can actually use, which is CSS grid. It's pretty amazing. I know it's a bit more complicated than CSS because CSS just allows you to style things in a one-dimensional way, but then CSS grid actually opens up the two-dimensional way where you can style things in columns and rows at the same time in the same container. I know it's a bit complicated, but just like how we create databases, before you take the time to create an ERD and be like, this table is going to talk to that one, and then we're going to store information here, because you don't want to end up dropping everything or just deleting that database altogether. So, same thing when it comes to CSS Grid. Take the time to actually plan out your layouts. You have Figmas or designs that you've been given. When you are able to plan it out and say, okay, this is supposed to go here, this is supposed to go there, it will be more simpler when you have to implement it in Grid. And another thing that helps with CSS Grid is with responsiveness. We know that our applications or our websites are going to be displayed in so many different device sizes. CSS Grid from the get go will help you to be able to achieve this. And it's pretty simple. It looks like this. You just assign all the different containers that you have to a name, and then you specify how big the columns are going to be. You specify the rows, and then you just plot them onto the area that you want them to go. And that's it. You have your own layout. And again, it helps you with all these other properties. You already know CSS Flexbox. It does the same thing. You now be able to center your divs, move your content to the top, move it to the bottom. But like I said, projects get larger and more requirements come. That simple grid that you implemented starts looking like this. But the more you understand it, you'll be able to implement these things without fearing, because you know the basics. And there you go. Now you can be able to center your div. But can you? Right? Right? Okay, let's test it out. My demo is going to require some participation. So I don't feel free to shout things out. Not too loudly though. Okay, cool. Can everybody see my screen? Cool. First, let's see some specificity. Okay, looking at this, let's start on our structure. There's a div with a class container, a section with an ID main, and then we have a p tag that's wrapping an anchor tag. We're trying to style this link text here. There's three colors that are currently implemented onto the same anchor tag. The first one is green, where we're just accessing or selecting the main ID and the anchor tag. Number two is for yellow. We're just styling the P tag and the A tag. And then lastly, we're actually going into the container first, then into the main, and then to our anchor tag. So using your hands, you can just raise up if you think this link is either going to be option one, option two, or option three. Now is when you raise your hands. Okay, I see a one. I see three at the top. Oh, there's a lot of threes. I see one. Okay, cool. Now let's see what it looks like. Hey, everybody who said three, good for you. And why is that? Why did it become three? Actually, you can just open up your dev tools on your browser and just select that. Like I said, you'll see all of these wonderful styles scratched out. And why is that? What you can do is actually just hover over your selectors, and it will tell you the specificity of that selector. This one has a two, because like we said, elements just count for one. You have two of them, it's two. For this style, you actually have an ID, which is 1,000, and then an anchor tag, so 1,001. But that didn't win. What won is up here orange, because you have an ID, a class, and an anchor tag. Cool. Next is understanding the importance of structure. When you take the time to actually make the structure of your page, you can achieve the same results, but just with different planning and different understanding of what you want to implement. This is pretty much the same thing. We have a nav bar that we want to style that has three items that are supposed to float to the right, and a nav bar or an H1 that's supposed to float to the left. We're all familiar with this. It's a design that is pretty much implemented in most websites. But then how you actually make this design or implement it can take different ways. But if you know how you want to style it, you can be able to do that. So on this structure here, we're using display flex, flexing everything to the end, and then putting space in between. Because why? You have this H1 tag here that you've declared, but you've decided to put all the items in a section. which means now this space in between is just going to split up these two containers. Cool. And then on this side, we decided to use display grid, which means everything is in one container. And you can just specify where everything's supposed to go. Where the columns, this nav bar is going to have a 70 viewport width, and then everything else is going to just go to the side with equal width and be centered. And if I can show you quickly, like you see here, a nav bar. And then for here, same thing, a nav bar. So if you actually take the time to plan out your HTML and then think about the styles that you want to implement onto that HTML, things won't be as hard as they seem sometimes. And then lastly, let's center a div. Okay, so we have three styles here. We have a container class and the main class. Okay, cool. The first one is that we're going to use display flex to center our div. The next one is we're going to use position absolute to center our div. And then the last one is we're going to use margins to center our div. So using your fingers again, I just want to see, just put up 1, 2, or 3. Which style do you think is going to center the div? Okay, I hear 2. Those online can spam the chat. It's fine. Which one do you think is going to center the div? Okay, I see 3. The top is confused. I see 1 in the corner. I see 1. Okay, 1. Okay, cool. Okay, let's check it out. Let's check it out. So if 1 is implemented, hey, the div is centered. Thank you to all the ones. But let's check out what happens when we implement style number 2. Oh, what? The div is centered again. And what happens with style number 3? It's centered. What? What is happening? No, this is simple. Again, when you take the time to understand the layouts that you're supposed to be implementing, you understand which style to implement. Because if you're going to display flex, everything around this div is also going to flex. So you need to understand that, okay, is this supposed to go that, or is that all my elements are supposed to flex, or just this div? And then if it's just this div, then let me use position absolute. But you need to understand now everything is just going to flow behind it. Is that what is supposed to be done? And then lastly, if you're going to use margins, margins are just going to move everything on the page with the div itself. Okay, cool. Thank you so much for your participation. You can give yourself a round of applause. So I know some of you are sitting there, you're like, yeah, thank you, Pindi. This is a nice talk. It's all fun and games, but like we have bigger things, bigger fish to fry. And it's so draining to try and learn all these CSS things. I just need to turn a button green and that's fine. And that's cool and all. In tech, we love the shortcuts. There's so many packages out there you can implement, and that's cool. You can implement whatever you want and it's going to be great. But what you need to know is that what you are implementing is built on the same foundation as what you could just do yourself. Okay. The more you run is the more you'll just do a U-turn and come back and you say, "What, let me just build this myself and I'll be fine." So to close us off, I'd like to say take your time when you're implementing, especially your HTML and CSS. It's tedious, I know. You don't have to take that long, but actually visualize what you want on the page and the code that you're supposed to be implementing, and it's going to help you in the long run. And then again, as we saw, the property importance is not going to get you anywhere. It messes up the whole hierarchy and things just go out the window. So don't use important, find something else. And lastly, write code that you can be happy to see in the future, okay? Don't write code that's going to take black magic to change. And you're going to stress everybody else because you're not on the project anymore. So yeah, just to close us off, CSS is awesome. There's a lot of cool things that I didn't mention that you guys probably are even implementing in your projects, and that's awesome. But if you just don't understand the basics of where those things are being implemented from, then what's the point of it all? Thank you so much. Yeah, I think, yeah, questions. Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, hi. Firstly, that was a really fantastic talk, Pindi. Well done. I have a question, and this is just in your personal opinion. Do you have a particular framework, I guess, that you like for CSS? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Or do you prefer just vanilla CSS as it is?
I Yes, I do prefer vanilla CSS, but there are pre-processors that can come in handy, like less or sass, where you can now block off your styles, to make sure that what you're implementing won't affect everything else. And also just scope your styles. Like stop implementing things that are global. Make sure that if you're implementing a style, it's that for that specific file, because it's gonna make things way more easier. Yeah. I think the people online must hear you.
Um, Sorry. Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hi PD, thank you for the great talk. Sorry. Do you think the reason why we were all gravitating towards minimalist design is because we're like low key afraid of CSS?
Well, if you're designing for yourself, I think yes. But then, yeah, minimalist designs, I think it's just a UI thing. If we have UI people in the room, we like, yeah, simple designs because it makes it easier for even for the end user not to be bombarded by all these complicated things on the page. Yeah, it makes it simple. But as you've seen, you can have complicated designs but implemented in a very simple way.
Hi, Pins.
Hello.
So I've had the pleasure of having you review my code. Yeah, it was a very long week. So I have one question.
Mm.
Actually, two. Why was your VS Code not in dark mode? One- and then two, how do you really feel about UI UX people?
Is this a trap?
That's the question.
No. My VS Code was in light mode because of escape. They told me that it has to be in light mode, but I think you guys saw it more better in light mode, right? Yes, yes. And then no, we love our counterparts. It's like a lover, many enemies to lovers trope. When we're implementing, we're fighting, but when things are out and people are like, "This is so cool," you're like, "Oh my gosh, we did this together." So no, it's not that we hate them. It's just, yeah, we need to just have more better communication and understanding why they are also designing things the way they do. Because we can be tired of implementing it, but we don't know why they did it. So if we understand why, and especially if it's going to help the user be able to interact with whatever we're shipping out, then it's gonna be good.
Hi, Pindi.
Hi.
I have just one question. Do you think using or working with extensively working with CSS frameworks um, limits your knowledge of pure CSS in any way? Would you recommend sort of using CSS frameworks as like your go-to thing, or
I say it's mostly like how everybody was afraid with GitHub Copilot. They're like, you still need to write your own code because it's just gonna regurgitate what you could have written yourself. It can help you once you know the basics because it's faster, obviously, but it shouldn't replace now your own learning and your own improvements. So the same thing with using all these frameworks and these libraries, it shouldn't replace your own growth or stunt your growth, but it should enhance your capabilities to make sure that you're doing things faster, but you still understand what's happening in the background.
right? Thank you.
Cool. I think we're good. Oh,
So, from a designer, all
so you
I'm
argue.
hearing is we're not the problem and it is technically possible.
And you know what? You're not wrong. It is possible.
Thanks.
Oh, we just have one down here. Yeah.
Hi, Pindi.
Hi.
As a junior software developer still learning CSS, would you recommend that I just use inline styles everywhere because they've got high specificity?
Specificity. No, no, don't do that. Don't do
Why?
that. It's great if it's just like your projects and you know where everything is. But then when it comes to larger projects where you're working with other people and you have to do refactoring and you have to introduce other features on top of that, it's just not the best. No, use style sheets. It can be styles that are within your document, or you can export them from somewhere else, or external exports of your styles. But yeah, don't use inline styling unless it's really you just have to because somebody else did something wrong and now you have to fix it. Yeah. Cool. I think we're done. Thank you guys. It's still you.